This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just stay there a minute, will you? Hang on. Right, what do you reckon? Should we go in on this? Should we do it? We haven't done it for a while. It's been a long, long time. Who remembers the last time we did? When was the last time we did it? I mean, we touched on some issues. We've touched on issues, haven't we? We've talked about huge shortages in all sorts of sectors, from veterinarians to fruit pickers and pretty much everywhere in between, the decimation of the hospitality sector. We've talked about the difficulties of exporting. We've talked about the almost impossibility of being a touring musician these days in continental Europe. We have touched on some of the issues, but we haven't for a long time. Keith, when did you last get the tin out? Can you remember when you last got the tin out? There'll be people listening to this programme who have no idea what I'm talking about. Such are the continuing march of LBC's burgeoning popularity, while Radio 4 hemorrhages listeners and we scale ever dizzier new heights. There will be people listening to this programme who don't even know what the tin is. What's the tin they're saying? And who's Keith? They're saying at the moment. Must be a little less niche. I'm talking about Brexit. Oh yeah, Brexit. Talking about that thing that was supposed to make us wealthier. Do you remember? And it was supposed to make the NHS more efficient. Do you remember that? And it was supposed to stop problems with immigration, and it was supposed to ease the passage of refugee processing. It was supposed to make us better off. It was supposed to make trade easier. It was supposed to get... Do you remember that? You remember all those promises? Obviously, if you fell for them, you're either currently in the business of turning off your radio, tuning into something less taxing, perhaps, a bit of Mantovani over on Classic FM, or if you fell for it, you're in the process of emerging, butterfly-like, from the chrysalis of your own idiocy, shrugging off your past as a creepy, crawly caterpillar and just testing out those new wings of comprehension, because finally you realise that trusting Nadine Dorries over Mark Carney was probably not your finest hour. Trusting Andrea Leadsom and Andrew Bridgen over some of the finest minds in this country was probably not the cleverest move you've ever made. Trusting Nigel Farage over pretty much every Prime Minister the country has ever had, bar Boris Johnson, well, and Rishi Sunak now, I suppose, was probably not the cleverest. Anyway, we digress. Because here's the thing. I've even got clips. Oh, yeah. You ready for this? So one of the weird things about the recent conversations is that there's a particularly ridiculous article in the Daily Mail yesterday, inevitably, proving this point almost to its apotheosis. The only people really talking about Brexit at the moment are the people who are becoming increasingly unhinged by Twitter, oddly. So they're complaining constantly about both Brexit and Twitter. But they're not complaining about the reality of Brexit. They're complaining about a largely non-existent constituency of people who supposedly blame everything bad on Brexit. Now, I speak as one of the kings of the Remoaners. I mean, there's a lot of kings. That's the problem with being such an open and democratic organisation. There's a lot of kings. I don't know who is the king of the kings. Who's the king of the kings? Who is the king of the Remoaners? There'll probably be a fist fight between me and Gary Lineker. I don't know who is the king of the Remoaners. It's a bit like Game of Thrones, like the worst ever Game of Thrones. So nobody thinks everything bad is a consequence of Brexit. Literally nobody thinks that. Anybody who thinks that is a weapon. That's a phrase I've started using, a word I've started using, because I like it. I think it conveys a mixture of contempt and sort of condescension. You're a weapon. Don't be a weapon. Never be a... So nobody would claim that. In fact, you can even look at inflation rates in other countries and point to the fact that by some measures we're doing less bad than other countries. But that's stupid. That is the behaviour of a weapon. Because all you need to do to contemplate or consider the impact of Brexit is look at where we would be if we hadn't done it. And there is now nobody worthy of the sobriquet sensible who would claim that we would not be better off and better placed and better functioning if we'd never done it in the first place. Even with this refugee crisis, largely inflated and manufactured for the reasons that I explained to you on Monday. They're going to have to resurrect immigration as a scandal because everything else has blown up in their faces. Literally everything else. That budget that Kwasi Kwarteng announced and the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail were queuing up to describe it. A bloke called Alistair Heath in the Daily Telegraph said it the best budget I've ever seen in my lifetime. Daily Mail said finally a true Tory budget, and then boom, blew up in their faces because it was built on absolute balderdash. But they were too thick to realise. And they were all Brexiters. Funny that, isn't it? Same people who thought that budget was brilliant, which we learned yesterday, almost collapsed the country. It brought the entire nation to the brink of financial oblivion, we discovered yesterday. A little bit more on that later in the programme. And it was done and cheered by precisely the same people who told you Brexit would be a good idea. The governor of the Bank of England has said that Britain was hours from economic meltdown after Kwasi Kwarteng introduced his mini budget. So hours from economic meltdown, or the best budget of my lifetime, according to Alistair Heath in the Daily Telegraph, and finally a true Tory budget, according to the front page of the Daily Mail. We are a ridiculous country at the moment because some of the loudest voices in the media and the public rely upon the media to do two things: to give them the information that they need to make informed decisions and to speak truth to power. And those two duties have been completely neglected and abandoned by huge swathes of the media, some of them even reduced to telling you and me to stop talking about that really stupid thing that we did 6 years ago, because it's really embarrassing. And there's no way I am ever going to admit that I was responsible for contributing to that ludicrous decision. So everyone else should just shut up and stop talking about it now. In fact, I would say that the patron saint of Brexiters at the moment is not Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or Digby Pudding Jones. I would say that the patron saint of Brexiters at this point in British history is Gavin Williamson. I beg your pardon, Sir Gavin Williamson. And you thought I was exaggerating when I said that the country was ridiculous. Sir Gavin Williamson. Because the mood, the mode, the message from these people, from these saboteurs, from these nation-damaging cretins seems to be, to me, Brexit should go away and shut up. Brexit should go away and shut up. That's the message now. Well, I'm not going to shut up, and I'm certainly not going to go away, because the damage that's been done to this country can no longer be denied. Can it? No, it can't. And I've even got some clips. You've got to love a clip, haven't you? Who shall we begin with? I just mentioned the current governor of the Bank of England, who has warned that Kwasi Kwarteng's budget, the best in my lifetime, according to one of the, quotes, experts, and quotes, the Daily Telegraph pays to provide its readers with insights and intelligence. According to the current governor of the Bank of England, Britain was hours from economic meltdown after that think tank-infested mini-budget was inflicted upon an undeserving nation. What do you think the last governor of the Bank of England has been talking about this morning? You remember him, Mark Carney, arguably one of the finest central bankers of his generation, arguably the finest central banker in the English-speaking world. What do you think he's been talking about this morning? Well, guess what? I can show you.
Unfortunately, what we're getting in the UK was predicted that we would get that. It's coming to pass. And to loop it back to the challenges that the Bank of England is facing, it's one of the issues the Bank of England is facing. And if I can actually cast your mind back to a few years ago, this is what we said was going to happen, which is that the exchange rate would go down, it would stay down, that would add to inflationary pressure, the economy's capacity would go down for a period of time because of Brexit, that would add to inflationary pressure, and we would have a situation, which is the situation we have today, where the Bank of England has to raise interest rates despite the fact that the economy is going into recession.
And that was on a programme on the BBC that even a fortnight ago, one of the presenters said to another guest, oh, no, don't do that. We can't go there. Don't relitigate Brexit, because they're cowards. And they've been completely battered into submission by right-wing liars all over your newspapers. The people who just a month ago were saying the greatest, finally, a true Tory budget, and it's the greatest budget of my lifetime. The level of lying is absolutely off the scale. But this week, weirdly, just as they resurrect the refugee issue in a desperate attempt to distract from the mess that they've made after 12 years of Tory government and 6 years of the Brexit they so fervently wished for, this week I can see the light coming in. That was Mark Carney speaking earlier about the fact that he is being proved right about bloody everything. Here's a chap called Stuart Rose, who I think is the chair of ASDA now, on Question Time last night.
We're now complaining that they can't get their apples picked or their... Many people who voted for Brexit are the people who are now complaining that they can't get their apples picked or their cherries picked or this picked. Lots of able-bodied people came to this country every summer. They did heavy work. They did pick our fruit. £75 million of fruit and veg rotted in our fields this summer, right? They did that work at wages that other people wouldn't do it for. And I know your point, George, is that maybe that's cheap labour, but we need the labour.
And even in the House of Commons, he didn't dare utter the actual word, but fair play to the Shadow Minister for International Trade, Gareth Thomas, yesterday, for doing some actual politics, while the rest of them engage in sound bites and slogans. Here he is.
Because it's not just food and drink. Recent data shows that exports of cars and car parts are still significantly down as a result of the trade barriers with Europe. And many hundreds of small businesses who were exporting to Europe, according to HMRC, have simply stopped doing so. Her own colleague, the former Exports Minister, said that businesses who want to export are simply not getting enough support to do so. So given the desperate need for growth after the kamikaze budget that she backed last month, can she tell the House, will there be more or less support for British exporters after the Chancellor's fiscal statement?
10:15 is the time. The question I'm going to ask you shortly is this. What are we going to do about Brexit? Do we have to talk about it? Can you solve problems without admitting how they have been caused? Do we allow people like the Secretary of State for International Trade to continue to represent a complete warped distortion of reality, as she did in response to that question in the House of Commons yesterday? I'll play you that clip shortly. What are we going to do about Brexit now that almost everybody with a functioning brain is acknowledging the damage that it's done to this country? But for the very, very hard of thinking at the back, nobody is claiming that Brexit is responsible for everything bad. I'll do it in words of one syllable. Not a soul claims it is the cause of all the bad stuff. I couldn't say Brexit because it's got 2 syllables. Literally nobody is claiming that. So all the idiots whispering in your ear, they all claim that Brexit is responsible. Nobody is claiming that. The people that lied to you in 2016 and 2019 and lied to you about the mini budget, they're lying to you about that now. Nobody is claiming it. But everything that's bad is being made worse by something that is still, for huge swathes of the media and the political establishment, an almighty elephant in a particularly troubled room. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to have this conversation? And as ever, when we dip a toe into Brexity waters, the callers who are most welcome on this programme, on this morning, are the ones who voted for it. Because in many ways, it's up to you how we deal with the scale of your mistake. It's up to you how quickly we can start rebuilding and repairing some of the mess that you made. And you know my view, up until relatively recently, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. I've got to be honest with you, I'm climbing down from that position now, because if you're still doffing your cap and tugging your forelock at this absolutely ludicrous act of national self-harm, then you are running out of sympathy from me. But you are still the people who in many ways will determine and decide how this conversation continues. So, what are we going to do about Brexit? 0345 6060 973. And can we actually begin to repair the damage that it is doing, has done, and will continue to do for at least a generation without, because I'm trying to throw you a bone here, Brexiters, can we have the conversation about repairing the damage that it's doing without acknowledging what caused the damage in the first place? That might be the only answer. That might be the compromise. That might be the tightrope we have to walk. Right, we're all going to work together to fix the damage that Brexit has done, but let's never mention again that Brexit did the damage in the first place. It's 10:18.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
22 minutes after 10. Can I just be desperately unprofessional for a moment? Would that be okay? Is that all right? There was a clip doing the rounds last night about all of the promises, all of the Brexit promises. I don't know whether it was an original bit of footage or whether someone had sort of spliced them all together, but I can't find it. If you can find it, can you send it to me at Mr. James OB? For now, I'm still on Twitter, still got a blue tick. Don't know how long that's going to last, how long that's going to be in place. But can someone do it? Because we're on a bit, the phones have gone a bit crazy. I've got a skeleton crew. It's not the BBC, We put all this together on a wing and a prayer. So I think you should do more, frankly. You just get to sit there enjoying the show every morning. It's time you pulled your weight. We must get back in touch with that caller, mustn't we, who I gave homework to the other day. I told him to listen to a couple of Full Disclosure podcasts to see whether we could soften his attitude towards a potential Labour government. Interviewed Alan Johnson yesterday for a forthcoming episode of Full Disclosure. And remind me to tell you about the insight, the angels of enlightenment that started singing about halfway through that interview. It was really, really interesting. On the difference between different generations of politician, not so much a Tory versus Labour thing, although it's partly that, but it was a real little penny drop moment for me that I shall share with you shortly. But before all of that, what are we going to do about Brexit? Seriously, whether you voted for it or not, it's now clear that it has made almost everything worse. So what are we going to do about it? Are we really going to continue to be silent about it? Are we really going to allow major presenters on the state broadcaster to talk about not wanting to relitigate it or, it's all done and dusted, it's all over and done with? Keir Starmer's hands are a bit tied at the moment, but ours aren't. So what are we going to do about it? Loz is in Plymouth. Hello, Loz. What's on your mind?
Hi, James. Good morning. It's great to talk to you as ever.
Likewise.
The first thing, James, is Mr. Starmer has to tell the British people we're going back into the single market, because the destruction that the economy is currently under is because of that decision 6 years ago.
But it's a large part of it. But I don't want to sound ungrateful for your call, but no. I don't really want, just at this point in proceedings, I don't want you to be giving advice to Keir Starmer. I want you to be telling me what are we going to do? What are the rest of us going to do about it?
All right then, James. I'll tell you what, and I've spoken to lots of my friends about this, and one or two of them are in agreement with me. I'll tell you what I would like to see. I always speak to the right people. I'll tell you what I would like to see, James.
Yes.
I would like to see a public inquiry into Brexit.
Okay.
I would like to see a judge-led public inquiry into Brexit, the lies, the cons, the deceit, the dishonesty. And that would be in my manifesto.
Because every single promise that was made has been broken.
Absolutely broken.
And not just broken in the normal sense of a promise being broken, but it's been broken in precisely the way that people like Mark Carney said it would be.
Absolutely. And you know what gets me, James? Yeah. We've been cowed into silence.
We have a bit, haven't we?
By major news organisations, etc., who know the people that have lied. They know these people have lied.
They are these people.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is, James, they know people like Farage and his clique and Mr. Johnson, etc. They know they've told lies to us, but they'll cow us into silence. And it's like, the bus has moved on now. Let's talk about something else. Apart from the one thing that has absolutely took billions out of our economy. That is why I believe there should be an absolute public inquiry into this, and the people that have lied to us should be held responsible and accountable. They cannot be allowed to get away with it, James. I'm so angry about it.
I can tell you are, and I respect your anger. I share an awful lot of it, you won't be surprised to learn, because if they'd sold as a product, if they'd sold as a car, if they'd sold as a box of washing powder, and it had turned out to be so completely different from what was promised in the advertising campaign, in the terms and conditions, in the contract of sale, they'd be in jail.
In jail, I mean, as I said earlier, James, billions and billions and billions of pounds have been taken out of our economy because of this. The British people are now poorer because of this. OK, a lot of people believe the lies. Like you've said before, blame the liars, not the lied to. But
it's hard to know where the line is now. It is, at this point, 6 years later, it's hard to know where the line is between the liars and the lied to. Loz, I respect your emotion, actually. I didn't see that coming. I've got to be honest with you, but it focuses the mind somewhat, doesn't it? If this was a product, if this was a holiday that you'd bought after the advertising campaign that you were exposed to, after the promises that were made, you got on a plane expecting to get off on a beautiful island like something out of a Bounty Bar advert, and you actually got off and you were on the fourth floor of a multi-storey car park being expected to sleep in a bucket. you would probably be demanding your money back, or at the very least, you'd expect the fella who flogged you the holiday to be facing some sort of penalty or punishment. Instead, they ended up making him Prime Minister. Here's a line from yesterday's Mail, from one of the most hilariously awful articles even that newspaper has ever published. The establishment has, of course, never forgiven Brexiteers for the result of the referendum and continues to do its best to thwart an independent Britain. It's by someone called Matt Goodwin. Quite how you can get up in the morning and think that the failure of this country to perform either economically, politically, there's no governance. It's a year to the day yesterday that they tried to get Owen Paterson off the hook for actually breaking the rules. That was all down to Remainers, though. That was all down to the establishment trying to thwart Brexit. I mean, it is just beyond bonkers. Absolutely insane. Now, what has happened to our country? And still, you've got the Secretary of State for International Trade saying things like this in the House of Commons.
It is about time that the opposition, who are calling other people complacent, pay attention to what is going on in the world and get off their personal hobby horses.
I can't even. Pay attention to what is going on in the world. We were hours from collapsing the British economy as a direct consequence of a budget that these people were cheering. But we should pay attention to what is going on in the world. What is going on in the world? Our GDP has plummeted. Our ability to trade with other countries has been stymied. Our exports have gone off a cliff. But we should pay attention to what is going on in the world, says Kemi Badenoch. Boris is in Luxembourg. Boris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James, and thanks very much for taking me on. Great contribution from the last caller, because I think that's exactly what you guys will need in the UK, a public inquiry. Gosh. And I've got really bad news for you guys, because if you think that by talking about it, that somehow you're going to fill in a form and return to the EU, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to give you 4 points why I think your re-entry into the EU is probably going to be an illusionary. You guys are out, and I don't think you're going to come back. Yeah. Issue number 1, your financial centers. One of the first things that major financial centers did when you guys voted for Brexit was fly people, politicians and consultants to London and talk to people there in order to make sure that those banks, fund managers, private equity fund managers move their operations. In Paris, in Luxembourg, where I'm staying, in Dublin, in Amsterdam, it's an absolute boom at the moment. In Luxembourg, property prices have gone through the roof with people moving here. You're paying in Luxembourg, a tiny city of 120,000 people, over £1,300 a square foot. That's prices like in London. Totally crazy. So why should these financial centers and the countries attached to them turn around and say, great, we want the UK with London back in there? Issue number 1. Issue number 2, I don't have to lecture you or the British people about the French-UK relationship over the last hundreds of years. In 1967, Charles de Gaulle gave you the veto. In the EU, you will have to need every single of the 27 countries to agree for you to come back. And I can just see that for some French president, whether the President Macron or somebody else, this is just going to be an easy vote winner to keep you guys out. Third point, where I think you're going to be really, really difficult. Think about all these Eastern European countries that used to give the UK, as many of the Western EU countries, cheap labor. All their youth from Hungary, from Bulgaria, from Romania, they were coming to the UK cheap labor. Those countries don't want to lose that cheap labor to you guys. And what are you going to have to do with somebody like Obrien in order to vote for you to come back? I'm going to leave that to you and to the imagination about in terms of what you'll have to pay in order to get that back. Fourth and final point is, Brussels itself, many of the politicians in Brussels didn't really welcome all the transparency that some of your UK politicians were forcing them to do. One of the amazing things about Britain and British politics is the transparency that you have. They might not want that in Brussels. So you're going to have, sure, you're going to get Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, where people enjoy their holidays. They might vote in favor, but you need 27 countries to come back and vote in favor for you to come back. I just don't think that's going to happen. And final point here, you guys had the best deal in the EU with the Margaret Thatcher refund. You contributed 19 billion, and unlike any other country, you immediately got a refund of 5 billion back. No other country ever achieved that. Do you think that if the UK starts to apply to come back to the EU, you're going to get that Margaret Thatcher refund again? No chance. No chance.
I'm tempted at this point. I'm already late for the news. I'm tempted to say yes, but apart from that. But this is no time for facetiousness or sarcasm. Very, very briefly, Boris, because I am very late for the news. Okay. Would you then caution us to just not talk about it anymore?
I think the best is that you try to get back into the common market,
into the single market. But that involves conversations about the damage that's been done by Brexit. So I'm not here to advocate for rejoining the European Union personally for the reasons that you've listed, plus Schengen and the single currency, which would be incredibly hard sells for the Conservative Party. Never mind the British public. But you can't start explaining why rejoining the single market is both necessary and inevitable unless you are cataloguing the catastrophe of Brexit, can you?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, one thing you mentioned is about GDP. Look at who is number one and number two in GDP per capita nowadays.
Go on.
Luxembourg and Ireland.
Funny you should mention Ireland, actually.
So all of these things that you're talking about, there's also a crisis, there's also inflation in Europe, there's also... I mean, you guys are in a very unique boat, and I think what your first caller said is absolutely right. You need a public inquiry in terms of why these people did that. Because
without that public inquiry, the denial and the deception, the dissembling and the disingenuousness will just continue. Without an actual, official, objective, judge-led public inquiry, they'll still be able to publish articles in the Daily Mail saying that the establishment never forgave Brexiteers for the referendum and they're trying to scupper the freedoms of Britain. I mean, the liars will continue to lie.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's hard to know where to start with that advert, isn't it? Farming and fishing are going to thrive as a consequence of leaving the European Union. Find me a farmer that agrees with that, or indeed a fisherman. And I'll give you the money myself, as the great Les Dennis famously observed frequently while presenting family fortunes. This is interesting from Paul. I'm afraid too many people would rather see their country burn down, tip over and sink beneath the waves before admitting they were wrong. You can spot them, says Paul, because they call themselves patriots. He's right, isn't he? And this is another one. As I say, today's the day, isn't it? I get a lot of these, but I don't read them out very often. But Dan's 28, he lives in Swindon. He says, I voted for Brexit as a naive 22-year-old, and now, having grown up, I seriously regret it. However, I have a mother that still thinks Brexit is the best thing to happen to this country, despite her business going bankrupt due to import issues from the EU. I think more politically aware people have realised what a mistake it has been, but those of us in the population that don't pay much attention to what's going on and get the majority of their news and opinions from Facebook are the ones that we need to start reaching. It's now got to the point with my family that if a conversation starts with the words "I saw on Facebook," then I just have to shut that conversation down and dismiss it, because as we all know, everything you read on social media is the truth. I mean, there is some truth on there. Obviously there is. You can tell because it's come from reputable news sources, but the made-up stuff looks exactly the same. How your mum clings to this notion, though, what idea she has that sort of demonstrates things are going well, is fascinating to me. That list there, controlling our borders, more money for the NHS, more money for schools, cheaper food, benefits for farming and for fishing. We could sit here all day with all the promises that they made. Every single one has been broken, and we're still frightened of talking about it, which is what we're addressing on the programme this morning. What are we going to do? How does this conversation develop? What do we do next? 0345 60 60973. If you're struggling to get through, just be patient. Catherine's in Muswell Hill. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Well, what I was going to say before 10:30 this morning was we just have to keep campaigning to rejoin in some form or other, even if it's just in little incremental steps. But after listening to Boris in Luxembourg,
Boris he's too modest to say it himself on the radio, but he, as you can probably tell, he inhabits the world that he describes when he's talking about the financial sector.
And I could only listen to that and think, right, he clearly knows what he's talking about. But my emotional and possibly intellectual response to that is I'm switching off LBC and just going to listen to Smooth FM for the rest of my life. Because what is the point? Yes. I'm like you. I subscribe to pretty much every word, every syllable you say, not because you say it, but I happen to agree politically with where you are. I have dual nationality myself. I'm French-British, but I'm born here, live here. My children are here. horrifies me at a deep, deep level to think that we've so terribly damaged our country. I don't know what I'm going to do about it on a personal level. I can get a French passport for one of my children who's still a minor. Not so easy for the adult children. And even if that were a so-called solution, because it gives my children the right to live and travel and work abroad, I'm not a big fan of divided families. I come from one myself.
Yes.
My parents had to emigrate from the countries they lived in for, my mother was a Holocaust survivor, my father a Jewish refugee at the beginning of the Second World War. So I'm not a fan of that family model. And more to the point for this conversation, if there is nothing to be done, if Boris is right, I don't know where to go. It's a dead end. You tell me. I thought I was following you.
Well, I think the single market is our inevitable destination. I don't think rejoining is an option for generations to come. I mean, partly for the reasons that Boris outlined, and partly because I still think that in a newspaper culture or a media culture and a social media culture dominated either by Russian-sponsored propaganda or by non-dom billionaires dedicated solely to defending their own interests, getting Schengen and the single currency past the British public, both of which have to be committed to in order to join the European Union now, is impossible. But we just keep pointing out the reality of the economics. Just keep pointing it out. Keep hearing the conversations about shortages everywhere from hospitality to veterinarians. Stuart Rose last night talking about fruit. But you just have to keep telling the truth. There is truth, Catherine, and there is untruth. And if you hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad.
The truth will set you free. But in the meanwhile, why hasn't Keir Starmer adopted that? I mean, I know the short answer to that question. Yeah. You give me the slightly longer answer.
Yeah,
because
it still must be working in focus groups. We'll find one, hopefully. Someone will ring in shortly to explain why they don't regret Brexit at all and it's all going brilliantly and they're over the moon. And it's more, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's, as with everything Brexit, psychological, not political. So you have millions of people who still think they won something, right? They can't tell you what it is. They can't even really describe to you what it is, except to say it was a victory. It is a victory. I have a brooch. Do you remember Blackadder?
Yes.
When Percy discovered green, they have a brooch of purest victory. It's utterly worthless until they say it's incredibly valuable. And they think it's incredibly valuable. They have a brooch of purest win. And they know it's valuable because people like you and me are so upset that they've got it. So it must be valuable because otherwise, why are all these tofu-eating, wokerati, anti-racist, pro-humanitarian, refugee-loving, lefty, do-gooding, why are they all so cross? And don't ask the question in the hope of an answer, well, we're cross because you've made yourself poorer and you've abolished your own freedom of movement and you've denuded our country on the world stage and you've turned us into an international laughing stock and you've made us a much less attractive. Don't do any of that. Just why are they so cross? Never mind the reasons. Feel the fury. Drink those Remainer tears. And that every time that those little psychological or rhetorical flourishes get a run around, I've got sovereignty. Don't ask me what it means. I've got sovereignty. And they polish their brooch of purest green.
Maybe.
And what Keir Starmer does, if he comes out and says what he knows should be said, politically, he is portrayed as trying to steal their brooches, Catherine. And it would still work. And that's why he can't do it.
Okay, well, that was a longer answer.
Well, you asked for it.
I mean, I did, and I will listen back and think again about what you said. And maybe the fact that it appears to be so unattainable, so elusive, just confirms their belief that it's this precious jewel of something infinitely.
And if it wasn't for you pesky Ramonas, it would now have overtaken diamonds and platinum on the world market. My brooch of purest green. If it wasn't for you pesky Ramonas, it would be the most valuable commodity on the planet. And Britain would be bouncing all over the place if it wasn't for, what did that Herbert in the Daily Mail write yesterday? If it wasn't for the establishment trying to scupper Britain in order to get revenge because they're so cross about Brexit. That's a brooch of purest green.
Oh, dear.
Well, you asked for it,
remind
Catherine.
Remind me what the frequency for Smooth FM is.
I'm glad you
and then I'll
said
leave
smooth,
alone.
because smooth is... I'll give my love to Kate. I think, is Kate Garraway in the chair today? I think. Give my love to Kate,
idea.
won't you? She's just in the next studio along. So staying within the global family. But no, please, don't leave me. I've got board games to sell. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. God, it's weird, isn't it? Feeling liberated, are you? Or I mean, she's not. Quite the opposite. She's heading over to Smooth FM for a bit of light relief. But I think got to continue with this. That advert has touched a lot of people. That's hit a lot of nerves because they are all liars. Every single one of them. Jacob Rees-Mogg, liar. I just found a tweet of his from a couple of weeks ago saying this is a real leader. Guess who it's a picture of? Go on, have a guess. Liz Truss. The newspaper columnists, the Brexity politicians. I think it's time someone actually stood up to them, isn't it?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. A little more on this. There are other stories around. Well, in fact, this isn't even really a story. It's a topic entirely of our own invention this morning, because it struck me that the mood music, I don't actually like that phrase, but I use it quite a lot, I should stop, was beginning to change, largely because of interventions. Even on Question Time last night, I never stay up for Question Time anymore. And the bias displayed in those audiences, they look like the cold meat section quite often, the Question Time audience in your local supermarket, didn't it? So a bit of spam over there, a bit of gammon over there, a bit of pancetta. No, there was never any pancetta. But yesterday, finally, a chink of light was let in by what must surely be regarded as one of the most irresponsible television programmes of the last 30 years. How many times was Farage on it? And how many times were MEPs that actually understood the European Union on it? Exactly. But this happened last night, and I thought it was quite notable.
Basic question was the system broken?
Yes, it is broken.
And you've just tried to spin to us.
No, it is broken.
A whole
It is broken.
myriad of things of making us try to lose track of it. But it's not just the asylum system. I would say that the NHS system has been busted. I think the transport system has been busted. I think education is in failure.
Courts.
The court system is in absolute turmoil. Dare I pick up your point, Mr. Rose, and say how much of this potentially is down to Brexit? And given so many of your party are prepared to stand up and say, oops, sorry, I made a mistake, I've changed my mind about something, is there a possibility that the country may have changed its mind about the effects of Brexit too?
Right.
Interesting. Both the applause and the fact that she was even allowed to ask the question. Normally you have someone standing up talking about the Fourth Reich and the EU SSR and sort of big lumps of human gristle bouncing up and down in their seats of absolute fury about things they can't quite articulate, but they're certain are absolutely righteous. I presume was she talking to Chris Philp? I like Chris Philp. I'm joking. He's kind of like what would happen if Chris Grayling was a little bit younger. So Chris Philp, is he the same person? Do you think that Chris Grayling was actually Chris Philp in a flesh suit? I do not know. But anyway, he's got the new job of marching around studios humiliating himself. Charlie State on BBC One this morning asked him what his qualifications are to be policing minister. He said, well, I've been an MP for 7 years. I mean, where do the comedians go next? What are your qualifications to be a policing minister? Well, I've been an MP for 7 years. Quite incredible. Back to this, and let's take that lady's question and ask it, because it ties in with what the caller before the news said as well. And I like my brooch of purest green. No doubt it will be coming soon to a social media platform near you, neatly clipped up and packaged pithily in order to reach the parts that other social media clips can't reach. It is a brooch of purest green. These people still think they've been given something valuable, and they can't tell you why it's valuable. They can't point to the things that make it valuable. They can't explain what it is that is of value, but it's in their hands and it's valuable. And if Keir Starmer gets portrayed as the person who's going to try to take it away, I believe it would still be electorally damaging. It's why Rishi Sunak, during his frankly, hilariously awful performance at PMQs, started talking constantly about the last leader of the Labour Party and Keir Starmer's support for a second referendum. And so still, even as, it's a bit like standing on a battlefield, having lost a war, pointing at the fellow who wants to replace you as head of the army, saying that, well, he never wanted this war in the first place. That's what we're doing now. That's what Rishi Sunak did at PMQs. He's standing on a battlefield, having been absolutely decimated in a military engagement. And Keir Starmer is saying, can I have a go now? Can I have a go now, please, as head of the army? And Rishi Sunak says, well, this man here didn't even want the war that we've just lost. Nah. Whoa, yes. What a wally. What a wombat. What a coward. That war we've just lost with all those casualties, this man here, Keir Starmer, he didn't even want it. So what have you got to say about that, Captain Hindsight? And they cheer. People like Chris Philp cheer it. It's incredible. And the reason that they cheer it is, of course, that they are still denying it. And that means that the Secretary of State for International Trade has to stand up in the House of Commons and emit bilge like this.
It is about time that the opposition, who are calling other people complacent, pay attention to what is going on in the world and get off their personal hobby horses.
Pay attention to what is going on in the world. This is on the day before, on the day that the Governor of the Bank of England actually explained that the mini-budget she was jumping up and down about brought Britain hours away from complete economic collapse. You've got to start paying attention to what is going on in the world. What she is doing, of course, is providing a little bit of succor to the furiously hard of thinking, because as all these consequences of Brexit accrue, there are two responses, and they go hand in hand. The first is to say, all these people claiming that Brexit is responsible for all our problems. Nobody's claiming that. Nobody at all. And obviously, coming out of the pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin have also made everything worse. So here is a thing, right? Let's keep it simple. Here is a thing. And that thing is getting worse. Why is it getting worse? For a variety of reasons. What do those reasons include? Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, over which we had no control. The coronavirus pandemic, over which we had no control. Although you could, of course, make arguments to say that if we'd acted quickly, more responsibly, more efficiently, more clearly, if we'd displayed more leadership, we might have had shorter lockdowns, we might have minimised some of the impacts, we might not have taken such a massive economic hit. But you couldn't control the actual viruses. You could, of course, by closing the airports and having a much more robust system in place as soon as we saw those footage coming in from Italy, you could have done more, but you couldn't have stopped it. Okay, so we had no control over Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. We had no control over coronavirus's invasion of the UK. All right? Now, you can use the word like invasion there because you're describing soldiers, enemy soldiers and diseases. If you're the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, you use that word to describe desperate refugees. That's where we are now as a country. So the invasion of Ukraine, we had no control over that. It's one of the factors making this thing, whether it's the British economy, whether it's the British balance of trade, whether it's the British security, whether it's the British status on the world stage, it is being diminished by three things, two of which we can't control or couldn't control. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine and COVID-19. The third thing that is also making this thing worse, and for some of the things that are bad or suboptimal at the moment, Brexit will be the biggest factor, the biggest cause of it. You look at farming and you look at fishing, Brexit is the reason why they've been brought to their knees. You look at job shortages in all the sectors from vets to fruit pickers, Brexit is the reason why they've been brought to their knees. You look at why restaurants are shutting at a rate of knots, pubs are worried about their future, energy costs are a big factor, staffing costs are down to Brexit. So don't allow them to treat you as if you are stupid, because you are not stupid. Do not allow Kemi Badenoch to lie to you about Brexit not being a reason for this thing getting worse. Just because other things are happening doesn't exclude the existence of that thing. It's incredible, really. It's as if you were sort of claiming that I've overdone the analogies already today. I was particularly pleased with the last one, the brooch of purest green. But it is as if you sort of have a bucket, right? And there is a hose pipe coming into the bucket, and there is rain coming into the bucket, and then you've got Nigel Farage weeing into the bucket, right? There are 3 reasons why that bucket is filling up. Now, if you say Nigel Farage should stop weeing into that bucket, Kemi Badenoch would say, oh, well, you're just ignoring the rain and the hose pipe. And you'd say, I'm really not. I just think that man should put it away and stop weeing into the bucket. So that's what she's doing. So listen to it again. That's what she's doing when she says that you should pay attention to what is going on in the world. She is lying about the relevance of Brexit to exports, which is what the question asked by Gareth Thomas, the Shadow Minister for International Trade, was asking about. She is lying about Brexit still by trying to seed the idea that because other stuff is happening, then somehow that stuff over there isn't happening at all. So just listen again now that you know exactly what is going on.
It is about time that the opposition, who are calling other people complacent, pay attention to what is going on in the world and get off their personal hobby horses.
Brexit is not a personal hobby horse. It is a self-inflicted national catastrophe, the consequences of which are only just beginning to be admitted. Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, you are a farmer, appropriately enough.
Hello, James.
Hello, Liz.
Yes, we farm, and everything that's happening, in fact, we did predict. We got a report written by Sean Rickard back in 2019 when I launched Farmers for a People's Vote. And it wasn't fearful enough, actually. The report is still there on our website.
Okay.
So
we put you in the Mark Carney. We put you in the Mark Carney category this morning then, of sitting there with a sense of frustration. It's all right for him. He doesn't live here anymore. But everything you said would happen has now happened, and everything they said would happen has now not happened.
Yeah, I mean, we were called Project Fear for saying, well, if there's a war, we're going to have a food security problem. Hey, presto, guess what happens?
Gosh.
If there's, climate emergencies, food security is an issue. So everything that we predicted has happened and worse. And I would say that everyone I know that voted Brexit, a lot of farmers obviously, have now realised that it's wrong. So I don't believe that there is this massive cohort of people really still clinging on to Brexit. Yes, some are, but I think it's really diminishing. And even my sister-in-law, who was a complete Brexiteer, just 2 weeks ago admitted that I was right about Brexit and she was wrong.
What was the straw that broke the... I don't want to call your sister-in-law a camel, but you take my point. What was the straw that broke the back of her support for it? Do you know?
I think it's probably a number of things. Lack of trust in the government with the continual lies, the Partygate, and then also they've got a business, so they've noticed problems with trade, and that's begun to open. It's opened it up, and they're like, oh yes, this was not a good idea. So the thing is, while we're all talking about the problems with Brexit, what we're missing, and which is what I want to impress upon you all, is that we are sleepwalking into a food crisis. It hasn't even properly begun. Next year and going into the following year, we are really in a very, very fragile situation, which is why we need to organise and launch a campaign like we had with People's Vote. We need to launch a campaign to align with Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is secure, because they've got access to the single market and they've got free trade. So it solves all of our problems. And so we need to have a movement, as we had with People's Vote, to campaign and make people understand how easy it is to do this. It's not anti-Brexit, it's still Brexit.
It's Theresa May's deal.
Fixing our trade.
It's Theresa May's deal.
To all intents and purposes, yes. But people really voted in 2019 because they were scared of Jeremy Corbyn. They'd been told that Jeremy Corbyn would do exactly what Liz Truss has just done. We are where we are.
That was definitely part of it. I disagree with you a bit, partly through instinct and probably through exposure to a different sort of Brexiter than your sister-in-law, a nastier, baser type of person, the Faragey-flavoured Brexiter.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
On, James, that person who's voted because they wanted to stop people coming over here in boats really has to look at it and go, there's more people coming over in boats now.
Yes, but they can phone Nick and call for sharks to be introduced to the English Channel. They're not going to call for Brexit to be reversed. They're going to call for refugees to be shot you see. So that level of nastiness is still very much persuaded
but
that Brexit...
Let's be real, they are a minority.
Yes, of course they are. Of course they are, but it's a minority that drove this. It's a minority that brought about the referendum in the first place because Cameron was so scared of them.
Which is why we need a campaign, because it's only by having a campaign and people joining together for the greater good.
Who's going to lead it? Because they got it horribly wrong last time on all counts. Who could lead that?
We didn't get it wrong. People's vote really, really did.
No, I mean Remain. I'm thinking more of Remain, the Remain campaign than the People's Vote.
The catastrophe came, with the push for the election and holding that fragile parliamentary situation. But People's Vote was great. But I had the biggest Remain sign on our farm here, led by donkeys. The polling was all showing that we were.
And then
we were
they
definitely
imploded.
in the Remain territory.
And then they imploded at the sort of office level, didn't they?
They did, but it wasn't the people, and I believe that we're well beyond that now, and it's time to really be optimistic.
I like your
time
style.
For good people to lead with the front foot.
Well, I hope you're right. I really do, but I still think that the brooch of purest green is the most treasured possession millions of people in this country have ever had. Even though it's worthless, it's the most treasured possession they've ever had because people like you are so upset, it must be valuable.
LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11 is the time. I suppose underpinning some of the conversations that we've had this morning is the fact that terror attack in Dover 3 days ago, on October the 30th, a little more, just at the beginning of this week, has been almost entirely forgotten. And Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, yesterday went to the processing centre in a military helicopter. I think she even dressed up. Did she dress up as well? Was she wearing fancy dress? Did she dress up as a sort of soldier type person? I thought I heard someone mention that earlier this morning. Perhaps I misheard. And I'll tell you why she's done that. Make no mistake. That is to double down on the rhetoric of invasion. You get invaded by enemy soldiers. You get invaded by diseases. Suella Braverman uses the word invasion because she wants you to think of refugees as enemy soldiers and or diseases. She really does. It's the same reason why the BNP used the word invasion in their description of refugees back in 2010, in their 2010 manifesto. There is not a cigarette paper between them. Not a cigarette paper. And that's why she went in a military helicopter, so she looks like she's going into a war zone. That's my strongly held opinion until I hear a better argument. It's not a very difficult place to get to, Dover. Unless, of course, the Brexit-related lorry queues are kicking in, which leads us neatly back to the conversation that we've been having since 10 o'clock this morning. What are we going to do about Brexit? What are we going to do about it? Oliver is in Leyland. Oliver, what would you like to say?
I'd like to tell you why I voted for Brexit.
Okay. Shall I guess?
What?
Shall I guess?
Yeah, have a guess, yeah.
Okay. Is it because you wanted to make our own laws and withdraw from the European superstate that we never agreed to join in the first place?
To some extent, that, yes.
Yeah, because that's all nonsense.
What?
Well, we did agree to join much more than just a single market back in the early 70s. Ted Heath wrote extensively about it. It's not a superstate, and we don't really have the... Oh, go on, never mind.
My dad was a senior officer in one of the big trade unions.
Yeah.
And he said, it was a bit of a joking conversation. He said, you don't like that, do you? And I said, well, yeah, joining a common market seems like a good idea to me. And the little so-and-so went and died between us joining and being given the vote to come out.
Mm. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry for your loss. For the record.
This is an awful long time ago.
Right.
And I couldn't work out. I'd never asked him why he didn't like it. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, "You do realise you're voting for the United States of Europe. That's what it's all about."
Mm.
And I said, "I don't want that. I want the common market. I think the common market's a good idea."
Yeah.
And so
Who was your friend? And what was his perspective? What was his field of research? Where did he get this conclusion from?
It was somebody I'd worked with, but I'm convinced he'd read all the documents. He was a
which documents do you think he'd read, Oliver?
I don't know.
No, you changed your view on European Union membership as a consequence of what he said.
My dad had already told me.
Right.
And I mean he knew people like Harold Wilson.
Yeah.
He only rubbed shoulders with him. He didn't. Anyway, and so I voted against, and I thought, well, that's it. We're
But what were you voting for?
What was I was voting against going into what was then called the common market.
Right. So we're going back to the early 70s now, are we?
Oh yes.
Right. I'm just interested in why you don't regret voting to leave the European Union, given the long, long lists of broken promises and irrefutable damage that we've been detailing since 10 o'clock this morning.
It was magic when I heard we were going to get a vote to come out.
It was a brooch of purest green.
No. You're making that's a love.
So what were you celebrating? What were you celebrating? Well, I'm not as good as your mate who told you that we were going to be joining an independent. What was it? The United States of Europe. He was even better at words than me because he'd read all the documents. So what were you celebrating when you felt that wonderful euphoria?
Because when I think it was Maastricht. I don't really know.
I just want to focus on one moment. We're jumping through the decades like Doctor Who at the moment. That day, that night, when the result came in and you said you felt, I think the word you used was fantastic or amazing, that euphoria of that moment, what were you celebrating?
That we were out and...
Yes, but what did that... Well, that's just a word, isn't it? What did that mean? What was going to get better? What was going to get better for your country or yourself?
We were going to be able to renegotiate. And
but David Cameron had just undertaken a massive renegotiation. You know that. So what was going to get better? Because we now know that everything's got worse, but you still think it was a good idea. So what was going to get? What made you feel euphoric that night in June?
Well, I didn't believe it was going to happen.
But you wanted it to. We're still. You've been on now for 4 or 5 minutes, and we still don't know what you wanted.
I was expecting when they were talking. Was it the Canada deal they were talking about?
Yeah,
or the Norway
you jumped
deal?
Again now. We're just talking about June 2016. You were celebrating. What did you win?
What did I win? We won our. Oh, you're going to say. You're going to say...
You're doing it again. I'm just asking you what you won. Don't worry about Canada. Don't worry about the 1970s. Don't worry about Harold Wilson. Don't worry about anything that I might be about to say. Just tell me what you won.
Well, we were going to be alongside the United States of Europe.
What did you win? What did you win?
Well, I thought we won the ability to get rid of the bits of the United States of Europe that I didn't want.
For example?
Well, the political side of it.
Yeah, go on. What was the thing you wanted to wave goodbye to first?
I was making a joke that night and saying, send some gunboats out to sink foreign fishing boats.
Yeah, hilarious. So what was the thing that you wanted to get rid of first?
The thing that I wanted to get rid of first? Well, everything to do with...
No, just not everything, just one thing.
One thing.
Yeah,
I wanted to...
You've had 6 years to think about it.
Yeah.
Actually, you've had 40. No, don't let me distract you from the central question. I appreciate you're not going to be able to tell me what it is you want. So what was it you were looking forward to getting rid of?
No, what I wanted us to go back to the common market that I thought we were signing up for.
But you voted to leave it. You voted to leave the single market and the customs union. So how was that going to help us go back to it?
I didn't vote to leave the common market.
You did.
I voted to leave the European Union.
Yes, but they were the same thing by 2016, Oliver.
Yes.
So anyway,
but,
what you said, you couldn't wait to get rid of the political stuff and all the difference.
Yeah.
If you so, give me an example of that, the stuff that you were hoping to, or even perhaps, if I could be so bold, an example of the things you're glad that we have now got rid of.
Well, for example, not being able to only the European Parliament is only able to vote on things.
Yes, but I'm asking about the things that they have voted on. I'm not interested in the procedure of the Parliament, the things that you couldn't wait to get rid of, the things that you were bound by, the rules or the laws that you had to abide by, the regulations that you had to observe, the changes to your life that had been implemented by membership that you couldn't wait to shrug off. What were they?
Well, we have to go back to when Thatcher decided to...
You're back in your TARDIS. It was June 2016.
Well, yeah,
You're celebrating